Hey gang, everyone here. Welcome on back to the Cade and another episode of Suckerpunch Sunday, the series where we take a deep dive into a classic fighting platform-based game from the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th generation. And for this week, we're gonna play a game that is one that I've actually never taken on before. And in doing some research for it, has a little bit of a history that I wasn't aware of, but it is the precursor to one of my favorite games of the latter half of the 20th century, that being Castlevania Symphony of the Night. We're playing Castlevania Dracula X. Now, this game originally was not created for the Super Nintendo, which this version came out in 1995 on the SNES. This game was originally titled Castlevania Rondo of Blood and was released in 1994 on the short-lived and ill-fated Turbo Grafx-16 console created by NEC in coordination with Hudson Soft. Now, what happened was, because that console, which was the first 16-bit console ever created and sold mass market, it preceded both the Genesis and the Super Nintendo in worldwide release, but because it wasn't as popular, what Konami decided to do was, after that console stopped being sold in North America, they repackaged Rondo of Blood as Castlevania Dracula X, and then they also retitled it in Europe as Castlevania Vampire's Kiss. But all three of those versions are the same game, and yet they're not, because in reconstituting this game, what they ended up doing is they changed some of the level design and did some other things with it that make it different from the original version of it. So what we're going to do over the course of the next 25 minutes or so is I'm going to see how far I can get in this game. Which, again, I've never played this version of the game, but I have played its successor. I have played Castlevania Symphony of the Night many times, and I will stand by my argument, which I made way back in one of our very first WTF Wednesday episodes we did, when we did Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest, that one, without Castlevania 2 we wouldn't have had Symphony of the Night, and two, that is one of the truly unimpeachable games of the 4th generation. It is as close to a perfect game that I have found in that genre. Now, the controls that we have are pretty simple. Your A button is jump, your B button is the whip, and we don't have any special weapons yet, but I'm assuming that's what goes in that reticle up top in the right corner next to our health and our magic bar. Now, if you're not familiar with this game, the general plot is that it's been several hundred years since the end of the original Castlevania trilogy, in which Simon Belmont has died, obviously. His first offspring, if I remember, I think it's Trevor, was in Castlevania 3. He's gone, and now we have Richter Belmont, who has taken up the mantle of Vampire Slayer, along with the famous Belmont Whip, and he has to go into Transylvania and rescue his beloved girlfriend Annette and her sister Maria from the clutches of Dracula and his hordes inside the titular Castlevania. So, it's nothing new as far as this game goes. Alright, so up and Y allows me to use my special attacks. And the first thing I noticed that graphically is that there is not much uncommon with what I am used to seeing in Symphony of the Night. In that, it is, the characters in the foreground are pixelated, yes. Now we got an X. And like most Castlevania games, you can only hold one special weapon at a time. Symphony of the Night was a rarity in that it was more of a role-playing game and allows you to eat that. Wasn't expecting to be able to pull that off. Not that I'm going to argue. But Alucard was able to stockpile his weapons so you could interchange them. Damn bat. Now, one thing about these games that I have always struggled with, and it goes all the way back to the original Castlevania, is that they are, at the end of the day, damn hard. And I'm not saying that because I'm speaking ill of the game. It's that they were not designed to be easy games to beat. And one of the knocks on this version of Rondo of Blood is that it ain't easy either. Oh, we got the Medusa heads. There we go. I got the boomerang. Except now, I'm going to have to find a way to jump over these spikes. I don't think I'll be able to get there. That is too far. The soundtrack isn't terrible. I always have to remember with the Medusa heads, they always go in waves. In that, I mean they bob. Now, unlike Symphony of the Night, also, as far as I know, we don't have a map that we can access. I love having the boomerang, as I almost lose it in favor of the dagger. Which is not what I want. Hello, big fella. Oof. Okay. Duly noted. Ah! I died again. I'm curious to know how many times I can die in this game. Ah! Well, that answers my question. So I would start all the way back here again. So I feel a bit of an Earthworm Jim vibe coming on already, in that this game will require a considerable amount of patience. It will require an awful lot of pattern recognition. And an understanding of what is where. And if you watched my playthrough for WTF Wednesday this week, and I hope you did, when we discussed the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game for the Nintendo Entertainment System from 1989. It's a similar thing in that games like this, because they were so challenging, and I can't tell you how many times I've heard over the years about how games have gotten easier in the modern era from about the 5th generation onward than they were back in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th generations respectively. And honestly, I am inclined to agree with that. And that's not to say that there aren't games out there nowadays that aren't difficult. Or that they're not challenging. There are some games out there that are damn hard. But by comparison to games that were released 30 years ago, like Dracula X, these ones were just by their nature, just more unforgiving. They required more of you as a gamer. Like so. Like the fact that you've got to really time your jumps to the millimeter. And you've got to bait enemies over towards you so you know you have a fair shot of getting by them. And in some respects, these sorts of games call for a degree of patience that the average gamer, even back then, we just didn't have it. We didn't understand that you've got to be fairly tactical in how you approach these sorts of games. Like, I've got to get him right to the edge of these gaps. And jump, and jump. Oh, and all I had to do was throw one boomerang. Well, now I feel like a bit of a nit. Now this looks like this is shaping up to be a boss fight. Hello, kitty. Oh, it's Cerberus. Ah! And it died. Hopefully that is not the enemy yet. Not yet. I still get the axe. I don't have very many hearts, so really what I gotta do is I gotta avoid the fire. Come here, Cerberus. So this is fairly repetitive in that I just gotta keep jumping over the flames. Ow. Ah! And with that, I have died. Which sucks, because I got all the way here. Makes me wonder how many shots he takes to finally go down. And that is one of the other things about this game that frustrates a lot of people, is that even though it has a password system, it is fairly unforgiving. Now, when the reviews for this version of Castlevania Rondo of Blood came out, they weren't very well received. Electronics Gaming Monthly gave it 27 out of 40. Famitsu gave it 24 out of 40. Game Fan gave it about high B, low A. And Next Generation was brutal. They gave it 1 out of 5. The critic for Next Generation panned it, saying it retains the by then outdated graphics and controls of the PC Engine game and would not appeal to die-hard Castlevania fans. He summarized it as, quote, 8 levels of no-frills, side-scrolling action without an original or interesting thought in its Wolfsbane stuffed head. In contrast, IGN's retrospective on the series referred to it as still, quote, one of the best traditional Castlevania games and holds its own in terms of graphics. It includes a brighter color palette, but suffered from weak AI and bad level design. And then in 2018, Complex did their listing of the best Super Nintendo games of all time, and this came in at 82nd. So in the pantheon of not just Super Nintendo games, but Castlevania games, I think it's fair to say that this one is somewhere in the middle of the pack. If not down closer to the bottom. And in some ways I can see why. Now the fact that I can't go back and play Rondo of Blood, although I think now it's been reissued on new-gen consoles, so I think you can, if I remember right, I think Konami released it as part of a Classics pack for the PS4 and the Xbox back, I think, 5-6 years ago. But it is one that yeah, it was included on the Symphony of the Night PS4 collection for Castlevania Requiem in 2018. And then in 2021, Limited Run Games announced an English release of Rondo of Blood for an updated version of the Turbo Grafx-16, which was called the Turbo Grafx-16 Mini, then the Turbo Duo, but that was never really released to any market that I'm aware of. The reason why I wanted to play this version of it is because this is the older version that everybody who didn't have a Turbo Grafx back in the day was exposed to. And again, as I've stated many times, I was not fortunate enough to have a Super NES as a kid. I went straight from the Nintendo Entertainment System, the original 8-bit juggernaut, to another great juggernaut, being the PS1. So as a result, I missed out on so many games of the 16-bit era. simply because I didn't have access to a Super Nintendo. Or a Genesis, for that matter. Ah! So I keep hitting the wrong button. Ooh, and he headbutted me right into the pit. Well, I hit him, but he headbutted me and I died. All right, we'll try this one more time. Like Earthworm Jim, I want to get past the first level, although I will say, different Earthworm Jim, at least this one is easier to negotiate my way through. Whereas Jim gave me really no help at all. I do have that on my short list of games that at some point I'm going to have to go back and revisit once I have a little bit more familiarity with it. Go away, Bones. And trying to work your way through playing this game with a D-pad, which was the norm back in the 16-bit era on the Super Nintendo. Did not help things. Although I suspect there'll be people out there who would say, well, you know, playing with a joystick isn't much easier. And depending on the game, and depending on the way the mechanics are designed, I would be inclined to agree with you. It unfortunately is a case of rarely, in my experiences, do you get setups as far as interfaces for games. Where movement is executed so flawlessly. In fact, I will put that out there for the community. If you know of a game that is like that, where the blending of player movement and mechanical interface with your controller is so seamless, leave it in the comments below. I want to do a bit of a straw poll on that. There's no right or wrong answer on that. I am genuinely curious what people will think, or what they will say. Alright, so at this point, I think I just gotta keep moving here. Up, skip, jump. Oh, and I didn't even have to worry about that thing. Alright, so I'm going to hang on to the boomerang. Because the boomerang tends to, in my experience, do more overall damage to something like this than, say... Ah! Got there and I died. Alright, we'll get one more crack at it. Pick up the axe. Careful with that axe, Eugene. I am interested to see why it is that some of the attacks that I have I do these huge area attacks with the axes rather than... Ooh. Ah, I'm getting my biscuits cooked. Oh yeah, I'm not gonna make it out of here. Yep, jump down on him and that's it. So, alright, well, that is, in a nutshell, Castlevania Dracula X / Vampire's Kiss / Rondo of Blood from 1995 for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. Now, as I said, you can play the original one on the PC Engine, also known as the Turbo Grafx-16, if you've got access to that, or you can play it as part of the Castlevania Requiem set in its original version, Rondo of Blood, that was released for the PS4. Now, question one, is this a good game? I would argue that it could be, but it is very much in, for lack of a better term, the vein of the original Castlevania 1 and Castlevania 3, in that it's a very unforgiving game. The margin for error and the degree of difficulty are closely intertwined, and they are both quite steep. But I also cannot ignore the idea that if you can get through each level, and there's 8 levels in the game, that each time you progress, like a Soulsborne game, you're going to feel like you actually accomplished something. Like you were able to overcome an obstacle, which will allow you to move on to the next big thing that's coming down the pipe. In that regard, it's worth putting the time and effort into learning the idiosyncrasies of the game, getting the pattern recognition down, getting the mechanics down, and really, really going for it. But, and there's a big full body but here, it's not going to make it easy for you, and the potential that you're going to smash your controller or get so flustered that you're going to want to walk away from this game feels really high. So I would say if this is the sort of game that is really in your wheelhouse, I would give it a try. If you are familiar with other Castlevania games, if you've enjoyed Castlevania games over the years, and you haven't played this one, give it a go. But if you're new to this franchise, or if you're somebody like me who's dipped my toe into this pond on a couple of occasions, if Symphony of the Night is more up your street, and again, absolutely nothing wrong with that whatsoever. If that's more of your particular flavor of Castlevania, then this game, I'm pretty sure, will not be one you'll like. At some point, because I can get Rondo of Blood and give it a try, I will most likely at some point in the future try that one, because as I understand it, Rondo of Blood, because the level design is different, it's also not as difficult, according to the research I've done, as this version of it. So it might be worth your while, considering there's PS2 emulators and there's plenty of ways to be able to play Rondo of Blood on the PS2, or even on the PS4, that I may give that a try. But like I said, I wanted to try this one because it was the first version of this game with this story of Richter Belmont, which led into Symphony of the Night, that we got here in the U.S. So I figured this is a good starting point to see if this was also being the first Castlevania game that I played in 16-bit, to see what the progression has been. Graphically, I do like it. It has a lot in common with Symphony of the Night. It's got a lot in common with its predecessors, Castlevania 1 and Castlevania 3. So that continuity, at least graphically, is there. As far as the music and all that stuff, that's consistent. So Konami was really sticking to their guns at this stage and doing their best to come up with titles for Castlevania that had as not just a gameplay flow, but a narrative flow to it. And I appreciate the fact that they did that. So, but like I said, it's one that if you're going to give it a whirl, brace yourself, because it's not a cakewalk. So anyway, that is Sucker Punch Sunday for this week. If you've been enjoying the content, as always, you know what to do to show that. Thank you very much to everybody who tuned in for the last week for our one-day playthroughs, WTF Wednesday and Sports Saturday yesterday, where we moved to 7-0 in our hypothetical great what-if scenario of trying to build the New England Patriots dynasty without the existence of Tom Brady on Sega Sports NFL 2K2 for the Dreamcast. Still having fun doing that scenario, and it's got us thinking about other things we can do for Sports Saturday moving forward in a somewhat similar mold, although we won't be always with a football game. So also bear in mind, we will be getting started this week on recording the episodes for our next playthrough. We'd already picked the title out. I have not given any spoilers away from what it is. The only thing I've been consistent about saying is it's a franchise that, as far as I know, was never officially released in the U.S., but was one of the most popular franchises outside the U.S. And it's one that I have played ever since I was able to get my hands on them when the emulator era started 20 years ago. It's why I got into using emulators to play games, was in no small part to play this game or this franchise. And I've gone back and I've started playing a couple of games from it. It won't be the one that we're going to play, but just to reacclimate myself to it, and I'm looking so forward to it. I don't want to overhype it, but for me, I can't hype it enough. So, like I said, we're going to start recording those episodes starting Monday, and then we will hopefully get those up and running on the Cade the following week. So we will have a one-day playthrough, and we will have a WTF Wednesday this week, and then those will be preempted again by our next playthrough. Be sure to follow us on social media through Instagram and Threads or on Central Arcade. Help spread the word about us as we continue to build this channel and make it bigger and better. As always, a special shout out to everybody who has subscribed. In the past couple of weeks, we've really seen an uptick. We were dangling about 120 subscribers for a while. Now we're closing on 200, which, yeah, it's a small number by comparison to a lot of other content creators out there, but we're a small group of really, really passionate game fans who just enjoy sitting down and putting these games together and having fun for 30 to 45 to 60 minutes an episode. So I know it's not much, but we do most sincerely appreciate it. But my name is Ronan. It's been great to spend the Sucker Punch Sunday with you. Be safe, be well, happy gaming, and above all, people, stay cool out there. We've got the heat wave back in all over the place, so, take advantage, stay indoors, and take care of yourselves, and we will talk to you tomorrow for our next one-day playthrough. Bye.